from and connect with our main speaker, Dr. Stephanie Brewer, who will be sharing her dissertation research with you all shortly. I wanted to just take a brief moment to provide some background on this webinar series for those who may not have attended a previous session. The Dissertation Dish is a collaboration between the International Association on Research on Service Learning and Community Engagement, IRSLICE, Lead California, and GivePulse. The Dissertation Dish webinars are meant for all audiences, from seasoned scholars to practitioners to graduate students, and these webinars serve to highlight some of the most recent research in the community engagement field, create a way for journal editors and conference organizers to be exposed to new research and potential presenters, and offer some support and possible guidance for those who are in graduate programs by way of tips from those who have just gone through that experience. So far, we've hosted 15 Dissertation Dish webinars. We have had over 800 unique individuals attend these webinars, and we're excited for you to join us today as we feature the dissertation of Dr. Stephanie Brewer, the Assistant Director of Community Engaged Teaching and Learning at the Center for Community Engaged Learning at Michigan State University. Dr. Brewer will be discussing her dissertation topic, Academic Community Engaged Learning and Student Mental Health and Wellness, Understanding the Lived Experiences of Undergraduate Students. After the presentation, I will work with my esteemed co-moderator, Dr. Diane Dobrnek, Director for Faculty and Professional Development in the Office for Public Engagement and Scholarship, and Adjunct Associate Professor in the Department of Community Sustainability at Michigan State University. She will partner with me to facilitate a Q&A. And then finally, for those who can stick with us past the first hour, we hope you'll join for the informal conversation with Dr. Brewer for an additional 30 minutes or so. We also have a few logistical items before we begin the presentation. One, we encourage you to rename yourself by clicking on the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner of your video image. Then click rename and add your organization and/or pronouns. We also recommend that you select speaker mode in your Zoom panel, as there are a lot of folks on the call, and this will allow you to keep the speakers front and center. Kindly keep yourself muted during the presentation. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please post those in the chat. We will be keeping track of your questions for our Q&A session a little later. During the moderated Q&A session, we will review those questions submitted via chat. And then lastly, a reminder that we are recording this webinar and it will be available within a few days on Lead California's YouTube channel. We will send you out a link once that is available. And with that, I welcome my co-moderator, Dr. Diane Dobrnek, to introduce herself and our Dissertation Dish speaker.
Thank you, Tiff. Thank you, Brian and GivePulse and the International Association for Service Learning and Community Engagement, otherwise known as IRSLICE. I am delighted to be part of the Dissertation Dish today, and it was my pleasure to serve with Stephanie as a member of her dissertation committee. So this indeed is a very proud moment in many regards. It is my greatest pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephanie Brewer. Dr. Stephanie Brewer is the Assistant Director of Community Engaged Teaching and Learning with the Center for Community Engaged Learning at Michigan State University. She's also the Program Director for the Community Engagement Scholars. She works with a team responsible for developing, supporting, and advancing academic community engagement and community engaged learning at MSU. She supports faculty, students, and community partners in the creation and facilitation of these opportunities. Stephanie worked for many years as a mental health professional. Stephanie holds a BS in psychology from Central Michigan University, an MS in marriage and family therapy from Purdue University, and a Ph.D. in higher adult and lifelong education from Michigan State University. I might just yell "Go Green" right now. Stephanie started her Ph.D. in 2018 and completed it in 2023 while working full-time and raising a family. And she wants you to know it can be done. Since completing her program, Stephanie has presented her dissertation work at the Engagement Scholarship Consortium and IRSlice, has been published in the dissertation overview section of the Journal of Higher Education Outreach and Engagement. You can access a one-pager about her work that includes links to the JHEOE publication, as well as the complete dissertation. And with that introduction, I would like to turn today's dissertation dish over to Dr. Stephanie Brewer.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks, everyone. Give me a second while I play with my technology here and share my slides. Yeah, okay. Hopefully everybody can see that. Thank you, Diane. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for helping co-moderate today's session. But really the most important thank you is for being such an important member of my dissertation committee. And I can kind of gush about that maybe when we get into that question and answer period. I got a lot of tips on how to find great people. I also wanted to say thank you to IRSlice, Lead California, and GivePulse for supporting and facilitating Dissertation Dish. I've attended many of these sessions and they've all been really inspiring and if nothing else, normalizing and a really great opportunity to hear about the emerging research in our fields. And then of course, thank you also to Brian and Tiff for all the support getting prepped for this session and for running the logistics behind the scenes today. So I really appreciate it. So as everyone said, I am Stephanie Brewer. I am with the Center for Community Engaged Learning at Michigan State University. And of course, today I'm going to be talking about my dissertation research. A little caveat, I did complete this dissertation and my PhD work in the spring of 23, so that's been 2 years. I will make myself vulnerable and admit that I had to go back and read a lot of my stuff this weekend, actually, to just refresh my memory. It's been a couple of years. So what I'm going to do today is give a brief introduction to why I did this research, provide a brief overview of my research questions and my methodology and my findings, and then spend some time talking about the pedagogical implications of this work. So I'm going to hop right into it. So just a little background into why I did this research. I think it's helpful to do a little positionality statement so everybody kind of knows where I'm coming from for this. As Diane mentioned, right, my original work was in the world of mental health. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I refer to my career in higher education as kind of my second professional life. I started working in the field of mental health, and I worked as a mental health practitioner for over a decade in a variety of roles. So I worked as a therapist in a community mental health setting, as an administrator in an inpatient hospital setting, and as a grant writer and administrator for a nonprofit organization. So lots of different kind of contexts for that. And unfortunately, like a lot of my colleagues in that area of work, I found over time that I was really getting frustrated, honestly, with what I felt was lack of influence that I had as a therapist working in these areas. As I noted these larger kind of systemic issue areas that were impacting my clients, things that I was certainly not making any progress in as an individual therapist. So my movement into the field of higher education and community engagement specifically was really motivated by those feelings of frustration and knowing that I needed a change. So I, through a series of steps, began working with the Honors College at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, where I was responsible for an interdisciplinary minor program, which focused on community engagement. And then through a series of life changes, I came back up here to Michigan State, where I am now, of course, with the Center for Community Engaged Learning. And I focus on academic community engagement campus-wide, so supporting the faculty and staff who are doing this work on our campus. And so it's really these lenses, my previous work as a mental health professional and now my work with students in this world of community engagement that brought about this area of research, right? So I really was kind of watching these students go through these community engaged course experiences where they are also grappling with these big systemic issue areas like poverty and gender inequities and education access and all of those things. And I really began to see kind of those impacts on the student experience and their specifically emotional and mental health. I noted that these experiences literally put our students outside of their campus boundaries, but then also figuratively push them outside of their own kind of comfort zone boundaries as well. And so again, my background in the field of mental health and these experiences with our students really kind of inspired or encouraged the questions for this study for my dissertation. So as I got into this work, what I found, of course, was that this conversation was already happening in the scholarship, which was really great. I found that mental health and wellness were already a top concern for higher ed institutions. But I also found that, there was some difficulty and we're struggling to kind of meet the demand of our student population in this area. I found that students experiencing mental health and wellness challenges tend to also experience lower grades, less social engagement on campus, and are less likely to seek out and receive services on campus, and ultimately have less persistence to graduation. So this really is a crucial component of student success. So where do community engaged teaching and learning practices come into this topic area? Well, what I found in the existing scholarship is that they have been presented as kind of these proactive, kind of macro-focused, big picture strategies that higher ed institutions can use to support positive mental health and wellness in our students, right? The existing literature speaks to increased feelings of connection, improved sense of belonging, increased feelings of empowerment and self-efficacy, all of these as a result of participating in community engaged learning experiences. And more specifically, participating in intentional critical reflection as part of community engaged teaching and learning experiences. So where was the gap? Where did I kind of fit or situate myself into? Well, what I noted was that in addition to positive impacts, the scholarship also spoke to potential negative mental health and wellness impacts on student participants, particularly when the community engaged teaching and learning components of the course were not guided and intentional. Also, I noticed that the literature really had not examined the actual lived experience of the student participants, not a lot of their voice in the conversation. So this led to my two research questions, which really attempt to explore what are students experiencing and how are they making sense of those experiences. So trying to get down to right, we haven't had this conversation yet, so let's try to get some of that information to understand this nuanced process. So my first question, what are the lived experiences of student participants of academic community engaged learning, specifically as they relate to their mental health and wellness? And the second question, how do student participants of academic community engaged learning make sense of the impact of these pedagogical experiences on their mental health and wellness? So in order to explore these questions, I conducted an interpretive phenomenological analysis, which I will not be saying again. We shorten that to IPA, it's much easier. Which seeks to explore the lived experiences of participants in order to better understand the phenomenon that you are studying. So for example, in the context of my dissertation, phenomenology helped to uncover how community engaged learning is unique from other types of learning experiences as it relates to student mental health and wellness. So IPA is consistent with traditional phenomenology for those of you who have worked in that area or are familiar with it, in that it's really interested in examining, again, those lived experiences of the participants. But IPA departs from traditional phenomenology in that it seeks to understand the meaning made by the participants about those experiences. So IPA really seeks to understand those lived experiences while allowing space for emotions and feelings as part of those lived experiences. So it sees them as a whole thing instead of separate entities. For participants, I worked with Registrar's Office to identify different academic courses from a variety of different disciplines and colleges that had included community engaged learning for the entirety of the semester to get the information for the students in those classes. And I sent recruitment emails. About 130-ish recruitment emails were sent. 17 students responded, and I had them do a little a little survey so I could get a sense of who they were. And then I used that information to send invitation emails to make sure that I had a good variety of voices included in the conversation. And 7 students ended up participating. With those 7 students, I conducted semi-structured interviews. I did do a pilot interview. I like to note that the data from that pilot interview was not included in my results, but it was an incredibly helpful experience. So I like to just point that out. And then again, so those 7 students participated in interviews via Zoom. They lasted about 2 hours. And then I also asked students to submit an artifact from their course. So some sort of assignment or discussion board post or something along those lines from the actual course itself. And this was a way for me to get or capture their thoughts from the actual moment itself, rather than kind of reflecting back on the experience. So a way to kind of member check the participants themselves. And then of course I kept a researcher journal as well to kind of track my thoughts as we were going through, and different kind of ways that I was thinking about what I was hearing, and early kind of theming and that sort of thing. This table provides just a little snapshot of those 7 undergraduate students who participated. They were asked to provide their own pseudonym, which was fun. A lot of them actually took that very seriously, and they had meanings behind kind of why they chose these names. So my participants included Alexander, Emma, Jordan, Mark, Melody, Sonia, and Gile. And you can see, again, kind of the variety of experiences that the students brought with them to these conversations. And I wanted to actually take a moment. I don't have time to do all of my participants, but I do want to give just a little highlight of 3. So you can kind of get a sense and a little bit of the story behind their experiences before I get into my findings. So hang with me as I tell you just 3 little brief stories. So the first participant that I'd like to highlight was Emma. Emma is an Asian American female identified sophomore majoring in biology. She participated in community engaged learning as part of an undergraduate studies course during her freshman year. And Emma served at a nonprofit organization that provides kind of holistic support for women. And she served weekly, and she served in a clothing closet program. This experience was her first time leaving the university campus for any meaningful amount of time or purpose. And Emma described the organization as, quote, really beautiful. She felt embraced by the organization staff as well as the community members they served. And she told a story that really stood out to her about a time when a community member came into that organization and shared that after 10 years, they had finally received a restraining order against an ex-partner. Rather than this being a negative or overwhelming experience for Emma, she instead felt really encouraged with how the community organization turned this interaction into an impromptu celebration, pulling out whatever food was in the refrigerator and really taking time to hold space for this individual and their experience. Throughout her interview, Emma voiced gratitude for these moments and shared that she felt really inspired and empowered by them. So that's just a little piece of Emma's story. Jordan is a white transgender male identified senior majoring in engineering. He participated in community engaged learning as part of an engineering course during his junior year. And Jordan was the only study participant who had a virtual course experience. And as such, his community engagement experience was project-based instead of, like weekly, that kind of traditional weekly service. Jordan and a small group of his classmates worked with a community organization to develop an experiential learning curriculum that could be accessed and used by nonprofit organizations across the state. Jordan reported feeling overwhelmed by the scope and timeline of the project. And Jordan's small group had a hard time coming up with a direction for their project. And he felt really early on that there would be difficulty making this happen. Jordan felt incredibly stressed by his project and his class and felt really unsupported by his teammates. So a very different experience than Emma. And then finally, just one last little snippet. Gile is a Hispanic Latina female identified first generation junior majoring in social work. She participated in community engaged learning as part of an arts and humanities course during her junior year. And Gilles participated in the course and the community engaged learning portion in person. However, the first 3 weeks of the semester were online due to a rise in campus and community COVID cases. So that can give you a little sense of kind of a when in time this was happening. And the community engaged project portion of her course changed scope multiple times as well throughout the semester, also because of the impacts of COVID. So Gilles' class ended up working in small groups that were matched up with a local community leader who came together, and they all worked on storytelling projects. As a first-generation college student and daughter of immigrants, Gilles stated that the storytelling process was very emotional for her. She felt vulnerable, but believes that this course experience provided space for her to think about her life experience in a different way. She reported that she began to feel less shame about who she is and where she comes from, and began to feel instead a sense of confidence and control over her narrative. So I think just having some of that, just little snippets of the stories is really important as we move into kind of how I made sense of these experiences. So once I had these really amazing interviews with all of the participants, and those were transcribed, I moved into the theming or the analysis process. And you can kind of see my thought process here on the screen. This is a tool that Dr. Doberneck introduced me to, and it was incredibly helpful. So it kind of works from bottom to top. You can see my thought process here. But essentially what I came to was these three main themes, which were identity or head, belonging or heart, and then agency or hands. And these themes really captured in the best way possible the stories of these participants. So I want to talk about these three themes and then, of course, talk about implications. So this first theme is identity. And it really highlighted that reflection on identity and knowledge development around identity were really essential parts of these participants' mental health and wellness experience. So intentional facilitation of reflection activities focused on, again, on identity, allowed for the students to explore these kind of pre-existing understandings of who they are as individuals and who they are in relation to others. And you can see this quote on the screen about, I've never seen it categorized in a specific way, but it really kind of helped me figure out myself and who and how I am. Reflection and knowledge development on the topic of identity were inherently emotional experiences. You can see that second quote there. In-class discussions and opportunities to share personal stories allowed students to explore their personal identity and develop a new understanding of self. And providing space for restorative reflection around identity and the opportunity to process these reflections with others in the class really resulted in participants feeling this validation of self. So my kind of interpretations of this experience or this theme, right? Critical reflection is already known in the scholarship, that this is a crucial piece of community engaged teaching and learning. But the participants' experiences from this study, my study, really highlighted the importance of critical reflection on identity specifically, as well as this kind of idea of development of compassion for self. Critical reflection on identity seemed to be the most emotionally impactful for students who identified as members of a marginalized social identity group, whereas study participants who identified as a member of predominantly dominant social identity groups seemed to be the most emotionally impacted by listening to their classmates' reflections. So that was interesting information. And then all of the participants remarked on the importance of having a faculty member with a shared identity, reading scholarship written by someone with a shared identity, hearing the story of someone with a shared identity, or working with a community partner of the same identity. So really crucial pieces for this theme. The second theme is belonging, and this, again, a crucial piece of the participants' mental health and wellness experience. What I saw was that intentional facilitation of opportunities to practice vulnerability, empathy, and compassion as well as opportunities to observe others doing the same, really helped these student participants to feel connected to one another and to their classroom and to their campus and to their community partners as well. Feeling validated and cared about by their peers and their faculty and their community partners, as well as having the opportunity to validate and care for others, really improved the participants' sense of belonging and ultimately had a direct impact on their mental health and wellness. So again, kind of interpretations, again, this is not new information. A sense of belonging very much exists as an outcome of these practices in the literature. But participants of this study really highlighted that relationships with classmates were the crucial kind of piece to developing this sense of belonging. And they also really highlighted, as I mentioned previously, that the sense of belonging was really developed through the practice of vulnerability, empathy, and compassion for others, where they could do that in an environment where they trusted others to show up and listen, right? So it wasn't just the act of sharing, it was knowing that somebody was going to be there to hear them while they were sharing. And what this study also added is this idea of kind of reciprocation of compassion. So not only is there somebody to listen, but they were kind of met in kind with vulnerability. So they were sharing their own stories and experiences, but then they were met with that same back and forth kind of experience from their classmates, some more so than others, but some also by their instructors or their community partners. But this process of kind of reciprocating that compassion was really important. And so I'd like to point that out, and we'll talk about that in implications, of course, but this is really important for us to know as folks who are planning and facilitating these experiences, is to really think through how we can model that reciprocation process, how we can use kind of trauma-informed pedagogy in the classroom to create these spaces where this can happen. And I talk a bit in my dissertation about brave spaces and kind of acknowledging the fact that not all students will feel safe participating in these types of reflection experiences. And so really thinking about how we can do that in a positive way. Okay, my third theme is agency or hands. Again, a really important part of these students' experiences. What I found was that students developed their voice in the classroom and in the community by being able to make decisions about their experiences, and again, by telling their stories. Students developed a sense of purpose by struggling with this concept of impact, including what it means to be impactful, as well as kind of questioning their own ability to make an impact. You can see a quote here about these kind of positive emotions coming when they're, involved, but then when they get to thinking about like, what does this mean and how can I make a bigger impact, it became a little bit more stressful. And ultimately, this process of developing agency resulted in a sense of pride and gratitude for the experience, and ended up having a really positive impact on the students' mental health and wellness experience. So my interpretations of this kind of category, again, this link is definitely in the scholarship, but students in this study really noted these details around agency comes from this ability to make some decisions about their experience and having the space to be able to share their stories. And what they voiced was that when they were able to kind of exert control over their personal narrative, it resulted in these feelings of empowerment and finding their voice, in a sense that their story and their personal experience was really important and meaningful. Around this idea of kind of grappling with this idea of impact, reflection around impact and the purpose of community engagement helped students to kind of come to the development of their own why. I also kind of noticed that as students were working through this process, it was really helpful for them to think about and maybe work on developing future focused narratives. So like, what do I hope to do with this experience in the future? And it really helped the students to feel empowered by this experience instead of kind of stuck in their grapplings. Participants experienced a really large array of mixed emotions as a part of their community engaged learning experience. but processing the emotional experience through this use of kind of resilience-focused and asset-based activities really allowed the students to see themselves and their classmates and their community partners as more than just their traumas, right? It goes back again to this idea of, instead of kind of getting stuck in the grappling, it helped them to see that this is just one part, and everybody can kind of move forward from this. And so I just highlight critical reflection activities that highlight strength and resiliency, frame these larger systemic issues as something that can be impacted or changed. And it can move that, again, understanding of trauma from something that is permanent or defining and isolating to something that is just one part of an individual's or community's experience. So why is this information important? What are the implications of these findings for our practice? You can see there's a lot here, and of course you will get these slides, and we've got links to the dissertation itself, so you can examine this further, but I'll briefly highlight each kind of category here. But none of these should be a surprise based off of the discussion in these last themes, but in this kind of area of identity, implications, recommendations, right, facilitate critical reflection on student identity and positionality, but do so in a way that it challenges kind of these existing narratives, and again, cultivates this kind of compassion for self, incorporate culturally informed and diverse voices into the course curriculum, and bigger picture, hire, support, include, and champion culturally diverse educators, including both the course instructors and facilitators, but also community partners as well. For belonging, implement curriculum that facilitates peer-to-peer relationship development, encourage and facilitates vulnerability, empathy, and compassion, for example, storytelling activities, and cultivates a learning environment that reciprocates compassion. So we can talk about that in questions, I'm sure. Models acts of vulnerability, empathy, and compassion by using culturally relevant and trauma-informed pedagogy. And again, bigger picture, kind of work to develop a campus culture that shows care for students and acknowledges these different experiences, implement policies, etc. Agency, include opportunities for students to make choices about their experience. It's their project, their day or time where they're going, pick their community partner, lots of different ways to do this. Help students to develop their why through reflection, etc. And then facilitate this creation of these future narratives. So moving it forward from that class experience, what happens next. Asset-based reflection, resilience-focused reflection experiences, all very important. And then just a brief section, I think I'm probably definitely on time here, or over time here. Implications for higher ed institutions at large. I really like to point out, and I think I talk about this probably much more gracefully in the paper than I'm going to right here, but it's really important that faculty who choose to incorporate these types of pedagogical experiences into their classrooms should do so thoughtfully and intentionally, and not just as an add-on based on all of these things that we just talked about. We should think about these things when higher ed institutions are considering things around graduation requirements that include community engaged learning or high impact practices, right? We really need to ensure that our faculty and practitioners are trained and supported in this work, and that kind of student barriers are being removed to participating in this work. And of course, really consider whether or not our community partners are ready for the scale up of this type of student involvement. And then non-community partners, so community partner support, right? As co-educators in these experiences, community partners have very similar responsibilities for this kind of student mental health and wellness experience. So having clear expectations of community partner roles and responsibilities, community partner orientations and trainings, as well as the financial and human resources support required to work towards these types of student learning outcomes together is really crucial. So with that, I will pause. I know we'll have time for lots of questions and answers, but you can learn more. This QR code will take you to the the dissertation overview. And then the second link is actually last summer through IRSlice, we did a webinar where myself and 4 other colleagues talked about some of those tangible ways to implement some of these recommendations in the classroom space. So, with that, I will stop talking.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I was really fascinated learning all of the work that you did and the interviews, and how it was also affirming with some of the other research that has been happening and been going on. Maybe share with us a little bit about, as folks are populating questions in the group chat, maybe what surprised you most about the research that you did as you were kind of reflecting and writing from these interviews and things that you did with these students?
Yeah, great question. Let me also, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see folks. If folks want to put their faces on, just know you'll get these slides. I think somebody maybe has already put a link in the chat, so you can click these links if you want those. So let me stop sharing really quick. Yeah, okay, so what really surprised me? That's a great question. I think first, my biggest surprise was just how open and willing to talk about experiences these students were. I always feel very delicate around these types of conversations, and I will tell you what, the student participants were like ready for it. They were wanting to talk about these things, almost to the point where you were like, okay, well, let's like draw that back in just a little bit. Let's come back to the questions. They were phenomenal, and they were really vulnerable in the sharing of their stories. So I think that was my first surprise. I didn't expect that. I think also what was surprising to me is this literature, right, exists, and I thought there's no way I'm going to find new information. But in the really detailed and vulnerable telling of their stories, I was surprised that I was learning all these brand new things and pulling in kind of these connections to, I went down this whole rabbit hole reading about this concept called communalization of grief, which is this whole idea about, similar to what I was discussing, having trust that other people are going to show up for you in your emotional experience, and how important that is to processing grief. And so I was continually surprised at where these little nuggets of information kept popping out. Again, I owe that all to the amount of detail and vulnerability that the participants shared. So I think that's what I was the most surprised about.
Stephanie, every time you talk about your work, I have like a whole new, like, I don't know, cluster of questions because you draw me in and I'm just more and more curious. It's that kind of question. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, while people are putting their questions in the chat, I'd like to ask you some questions about how you came to the methodology or the approach to inquiry you picked. So I imagine we have some folks on today in the dissertation dish that are trying to think through, you know, am I going to do a phenomenology? Am I going to do something else? So could you tell us a little bit more about like how you came to phenomenology and IAP? Just like, did you try other things on first, or like, how did you get there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is the most daunting part. I don't want to speak for everybody. I know we have some colleagues who love this part. I'm calling out Drew Pearl if he's here right now. Folks who really like dig in and love this. I find it intimidating and scary. And so I would be happy to share how I came to this methodology process. I'm going to go all the way back to my master's degree, but I promise I'm not going to talk about that 20 years in between. So when I did my master's degree, we did a research-based thesis experience. And way back in the day when that happened, quantitative methods were the way. It was not, there weren't really options for other ways of doing this work. And I remembered thinking at that time, right, I was doing this very personal work in the therapy room and talking with folks about their stories and hearing their experiences. And then when I went to do this qualitative study for my thesis, it felt very disconnected. And I thought, oh, I don't love that, right? That's not kind of who I am. So flash forward, many years later, I won't say exactly how many, but many years later, and I'm going through my PhD process. In all of my methods courses, there were these little pieces of assignments that were helping me put together kind of my own worldview about this idea of methodology. So for any folks who are in those classes right now, it feels frustrating in the moment sometimes, but it comes all together. It usually comes back together. And I went through this process of really thinking about, like, how do I think about how knowledge is created, and where do I kind of think the slider belongs on in terms of big macro data versus individual stories. And so based on that process, I knew that qualitative was my direction, and thus began my search for exactly how I wanted to make that happen. So in qualitative classes, did some exploration, did kind of try a couple things on, but ended up taking a phenomenology course. The entire semester was for phenomenology. Fascinating, and also pieces of it that didn't entirely fit, right? This idea that emotions and kind of this mental health aspect didn't fit into phenomenology was difficult for me. So I spoke with my faculty member in that class, and who is a well-known phenomenological researcher. He kind of provided me with some directions to IPA. So long story, it fits my worldview. It felt like the right path for my subject area. And so when all of those things came together, that's the way I went.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Yeah.
One of the questions that just popped into the chat from Claire, you had talked about in your presentation about creating these brave spaces.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit more about this in the context of your study?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those questions where I'm like, okay, man, it's been a couple of years. So let me think back to the specific ways I talked about this in the actual paper. But essentially, the idea is I talk briefly about the concept of safe spaces, which I think is a pretty familiar term and has been used for a while, both in scholarship and in practice. And it's this idea of kind of working with your students to create these safe spaces so that folks can show up and be vulnerable and that sort of thing. And one of the critiques of that idea has been that it doesn't recognize the fact that for some of our students, there are not safe spaces either on our campus or in our classrooms or in the community. And by inviting them to participate in a quote unquote safe space, we're actually doing a disservice to some of our students who have to work harder or hold more of the emotional responsibility in that supposed safe space. So instead, the critique recommends that we call them brave spaces instead. The idea is very similar. We're working to create these spaces where our students can feel vulnerable and where they can show up in a way that allows for connection with others. But it recognizes intentionally and very directly that not all students will feel safe in the space. And so instead, it's an invitation to be brave in that space. And actually, the scholarship around that concept is really I find it to be really exhilarating because it does a lot of, it talks very much about how to do that, right? So you have actual conversations in your classroom space with your students. What is a brave space? What is it that I'm asking you to do in this space? And what do I, as the facilitator, also commit to doing in order to hopefully create this brave space. So I think it's, I did a quick little search here actually in my dissertation to get a reference for you. Arrow and Clemens from 2013 kind of started this conversation. And so that would be a place to start. Let me put those names actually in here. But I think it's quality reading for anybody who wants to learn more about that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
What great food for thought.
Yeah.
We have a question here from one of our wonderful colleagues. With all of the emphasis on student success on our campuses, and rightly so, what might be some strategies for promoting good community-engaged learning as a path to student success? You cautioned about such requirements, like campus-wide requirements, and needing to have faculty prepared in advance for such an effort. Are there program formats, like cohort programs, that might serve as a model? So what do we do?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Renee. Thank you for the question. Gosh, I have a lot of thoughts around this. So I do caution a bit about making these kind of widespread requirements on our campuses without also providing then the resources to support those things. So I think that my suggestions for paths forward would be to provide the resources to support such things, right? So I talked briefly about, again, training programs, and absolutely cohort models seem like a really smart way to go. So I think of faculty fellows experiences where there is kind of this intensive training experience, and then also perhaps some consultative support for the actual implementation of the experiences. I think that's a big one. I also think about providing different ways for our campuses to encourage this work. And I think about that in terms of, well, specifically like promotion tenure, understandings and expectations. This is in no way my work, and I don't spend a lot of time there, but I like to mention that as a really important piece of this, right? So making sure that our faculty who are doing this work, that the amount of time and energy and kind of undocumented pieces that go into that are really valued the same way in their promotion packages. I fear that when those things are not in place, our faculty likely feel a lot of pressure to move through quickly. And as we all know, at least, well, I'll speak for myself, I don't like to work that way. I assume other people don't like to work that way. And things get missed, right? Details get missed. And some of that kind of emotional support that I've been talking about also gets missed because there's just not enough time in the day. So yeah, I don't know, that felt like a kind of rambling answer, but I think really making sure that we've got training, resources, both financial and time, for our faculty to do these things. And yeah, for sure, cohort models could be a really great model for doing that, for sure. Great question.
As we're waiting for a few more to come into the chat, I would again like to ask you a little bit more about the early part of your presentation.
Yeah.
You noted that like having a pilot study was helpful. Could you
Yes.
say a little bit more about what it helped you out with? Because I think sometimes people are just so excited to jump right into the research. The pilot study seems like kind of maybe a waste of time a little bit. So why was that helpful?
Why was that helpful? 100%. Great question. So I think first, just a little nuanced piece of information about that pilot experience. So a part of my work is that I am the program director for a community engagement scholars program, which is a group of undergraduate students that I get to know very well. And so I specifically asked a student that I know very well to do this pilot experience with me. So there was some established trust already in that relationship. And it was an opportunity for me to get very direct feedback from that person about how the interview went and how it felt and all of those things. So I feel like that is important to note. So I did this pilot study, interview as a way to test out questions, essentially, right? So again, this topic area, I was kind of thinking I was going to have to treat it with kid gloves. I wasn't sure what the students were going to be willing to talk about. It felt very personal to me. Again, surprised to find out that they were like, let's talk about it. But so this pilot experience was a way for me to kind of feel this out. So are these questions going to elicit responses in such a way that the information is useful to my questions? Are these questions digging enough into the experience? Are they being too kind of quiet and like, oh, we're good, we'll just ask these couple of questions? So the pilot really helped me to feel out those questions in a way. Do they work? Are they providing the information that's going to be helpful, etc.? But then what was really nice, again, because I knew this young human really well, was that I could ask directly, like, okay, how did this feel for you on your end? Did this make sense to you? Did this feel like I was being too much in your business, or was this did this feel like an okay experience? And then also we talked about kind of ordering of questions, and they provided really great feedback. I said, what do you wish that I had asked that I didn't ask? And actually they added 2 questions to my interview protocol. So it was super helpful. Highly recommend. And it kind of changed quite a bit actually about how I was planning to do the interviews.
That's really awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Stephanie.
Yeah.
A question came in from Rebecca. Did any of your interviewees combine research with their community engaged learning? And if yes, how was that experience different from other types of engagement?
Great question. I'm thinking back to the courses that these students participated in. I don't think so. The only one that I'm pausing on is Jordan, the brief snippet that I told you about with the they kind of created this curriculum experience. It was a senior level course. And so it was just handled a little bit differently. The whole course experience was just a little bit different. It was virtual, it was project-based. And so there were components of that experience that I guess leaned more into the research area, but not, none of the courses were in that kind of traditional research category. It was definitely more so on the traditional teaching and learning, community engagement experience. So good question. So I'm sorry, I can't reference the second half of the question because they weren't.
No worries at all. All right, so we are kind of coming up on time. I did want to thank you, Stephanie, for a thoughtful presentation on your recent dissertation. Well, I guess recent as in the last couple of years, along with fostering a great discussion with our audience. This includes our moderated Q&A. We still have another 30 minutes for a deeper discussion, so we hope that you will stay on and join us for that. But we also understand if you cannot stay on. But before we transition, I just wanted to kind of give just a couple reminders. One, we did record this webinar. It will be available within the next week or so on the Lead California YouTube channel, and we will send out a link to all the registrants once it is available. There will be a follow-up email from GivePulse coming to you today with a link to a webinar evaluation. If you can, please take some time to give us your feedback. I also wanted to throw up some slides here to just let you know that we do have the next dissertation dish coming up in August, on Thursday, August 14th at 9 a.m. South African time. That's because it will be a part of the IRSlice conference there, and it will also be broadcast as well. But we are in the process of finalizing the scholar and presentation that will happen probably next month, as the recipient of the 2025 Dissertation Award is decided by the IRSlice team. So more details to come about that. And then also wanted to share
Slides were slow sharing, but we can see.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
There we are. We got them now.
You got them? Perfect. So just some information about that dissertation dish, but that will be coming as soon as we get more of those details finalized. And then also wanted to make sure, if you weren't already aware, the upcoming IRSlice conference, August 13th through the 15th in Durban, South Africa. I know the team is really looking forward to seeing as many folks that can attend, to be there and be present. Really excited and looking forward to that. And then also just wanted to let you know that we do have, GivePulse anyway, has a webinar next month that we hope that you might join us for. It is in partnership with Unify America, and we will be highlighting Miami-Dade College. That will be on Tuesday, May 6th at 3 p.m. Central Time. There's a lovely QR code that you can use if you're interested in registering for that. And that will be focusing around civil discourse with students. So with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my slides again so we can see all the faces.